Hello and welcome everybody. Welcome back to Agile Network India event. And so this is the last panel discussion. No, it's not a panel discussion. So this is the last speaker session of the day. And to proceed further, I would request Mr. Ajay Solanki to take over. Thank you.
Thank you, Shreya, and good afternoon, everyone. I'm so excited to be here and glad to see so many friends. I invite Sachin to give a brief introduction about himself and share his bulletproof testing strategy. I'm sure it will benefit all the developers, testers, and the Agile community. Over to you, Sachin.
Let me start. I understand it's it's an end of day presentation. This would be the last one. So hoping forward and thanks for all to joining and let me start. So I also thank Agile Network India, for giving me an opportunity to express my thoughts about this chapter, which is quite interesting and which is quite evolving as a subject. We'll start with it's a full packed, so I'm sure it will definitely take 45 minutes. About me, in brief, I will not take too much of time. Then we'll look at what would be the key takeaways from this session from my perspective, because that's what I think about it. We would see business expectations in the sense that what are the business expectations from a product or service in general? How is it changing, and what would be the expectations that come on the test strategy or QA strategy as a whole, or a QA or activities of a product as a whole. Then we will see the elements of test strategy. We will look at how development processes, methodology are changing and influencing a test strategy. We will look at factors influencing test strategy on a larger picture. We will look at what would make it bulletproof, for a developer, which would be a key takeaway. And we'll look at some of the tools and techniques that we would use in test strategy. And we will also look at, since 2021, 2020 is about to end, has been a difficult year, and a lot has changed in 2020. So we'll look at what is it in 2021 that we have to look at from a quality perspective, a way to go for test strategy. So that's the agenda, and we would definitely have some minutes for Q&A. We'll be happy to take questions as well after the agenda. So about myself in brief, my name is Sachin Kinare. I'm currently working in Rev Technologies as a senior test manager, so as a test architect actually. It's a product-based company in Mumbai, and the parent is Northgate Public Services. My earlier experience has been with Capgemini, and I have a work ex of about 16 plus years into testing, hands-on testing, test management, test automation, and setting up test teams, running them for different customers. So that's about me, and my coordinates have been mentioned below. So you can contact me for training, consulting, mentoring, setting up teams, improving them. So that's about me. Happy to help. Let me move to the next slide. Key takeaways from this session: we would know the test strategy elements, what constitutes a test strategy. We will look at what factors we need to consider while as a QA manager or as a test architect to decide what strategy would be, rather than following up with a template and uh, just abiding with the template. So a lot is changing. We should take care of those. We'll look at developers' perspective, which made me think quite a lot when I was preparing for the slides, and I'm sure it would be an interesting one. We'll look at the tools and techniques. Definitely that will help make the strategy better and efficient. We'll look at 2021 trends. So I understand this would be the key takeaways from this session. I'll move to the next one. Let's start. Right. So World Quality Report and the Gartner trends for 2021. What they say is we need to have a business assurance, a lot of expectations about the product or service not failing. We should have the business assured. That is one. We will need to have also look at enhanced security measures. From a data leakage perspective, from we have looked at in this year a lot of, just for an example, uh, the governments have been suing conglomerates about data being used in not so legal way. So we'll need to look at how the data is not leaking from my system and being where it is being saved within the domain from the customer's perspective. So that's a very important topic. We also have to look at a distributed cloud and anywhere operations, which are the trends. The AI driven engineering and definitely hyper automation, interconnected things, all these things make QA a little complex and even make a product development a bit complex to get through. And definitely all the expectations would come on a good quality assurance process and strategy. So that's what is the expectation from Gartner technology trends as well as the World Quality Report 2020, Gartner technology trends 2021. So let's move at uh, how would we comply with this. A general test strategy structure. uh, I haven't attached a test strategy template, but definitely there are many guidelines from IEEE as well as the TMAP section, which has master test plan, which has a lot of sections about test strategy. We would start with a scope. We would look at the scope of a product or service and activities. We will look at objectives. We'll look at the team roles, responsibilities. We look at what we will deliver. We look at what are the test levels that we will carry out, what test techniques we will use. We also look at the entry exit criteria, risk management, defect management. We look at and align with the change and config management process. We also look at the environment and data needs. What will be the test overall test environments that we will be available. So from a dev perspective, from a test perspective, from a pre-prod UAT perspective, and finally, what would be the configs of prod as well. So, how would they go back and what would be the scaling factors between say prod to pre-prod, from pre-prod to QA or UAT, and which activities will take place in which environment, what data will be available in what environment. So all these are, I would say more or less template activities that we will look at. And they would be a constituent of a test strategy. We'll move next because the uh, next slides or expectations are the ones which would constitute a test strategy. So this is a template, and I would say the next few slides will constitute or give inputs, or we'll have to make adjustments into test strategy accordingly. Last few years, we have seen a lot of, I would say, shift into agile Scrum, way of working from a pure traditional waterfall way of working. How it changes the way of working is definitely we have our QAs or testers or test activities aligned with sprints now. And from a sprint cycle, now then we get into a release cycle, which are quite quick, quite fast. We have to look at what happens within sprint, within the umbrella or scope of the sprint. We'll have to look at what happens within release. And then we also have to look at whether the release is a go live, what is the go live cycle, or it's a UAT. And then depending on whether it's a go live or UAT, we have to align also our activities and test levels. So this is the change that Agile Scrum brings in. We also have to look at the DevOps impact onto the QA strategy, because now a lot more thrust or impact of automation automated activities and the CI/CD activities actually DevOps is bringing in, and then I'm expected to execute continuously. So from the unit tests, my API tests, all my tests at different intervals, and I have to also integrate it with Jenkins, the CI/CD tool, and my test pipeline has to be there. So this brings a lot change, because initially we were not expected to run as frequently, but DevOps bring in that change. There are certain, again, some methodologies about TDD, BDD, test driven development or behavioral driven development. Uh, both these aspects bring in a bit of, I would say, inputs to a test strategy, because uh, in a test driven development, my test class will be written first, and my unit test will be written first, and then uh, you know I would write the code, take that template and write the code to test it. uh, Again, there are different ways how complex is the product, and whether I really work as per TDD in many of the complex business scenarios, because every way of working has its own pros and cons and maturity of teams which it works under. Behavioral driven development, which is a given when then kind of writing and then automating it with tools like Cucumber, Gherkins, and its related framework. So my automation gets, I would say, influenced by the BDD kind of a framework. It can also live without it, but then if BDD is a way of working adopted by under Agile Scrum framework, I would have to give that consideration towards my test strategy or QA strategy and automation strategy as a whole. So definitely the last point is, it's not the last, but from a process perspective, my release management, how frequently I release into production. Uh, as we know, Google and I would say Microsoft, they are very quick. So probably they release into production every, say, 10, 12, 14, 16 hours. And they have a way, to test their releases. However, in real life, when we work with our customers, not all are that matured, that automated and processes. And then we have our release schedule. So I have seen customers who had 4 releases a year, and not even 4 releases a year, 4 main releases every quarter, probably summer, winter, and all those things. So we are moving quite ahead, and we are becoming agile in terms of how we respond uh, to the external demands. Definitely that is a good thing. However, again, there is the another end, wherein the target is how Google and other companies do it. Probably our customers may or may not be that quick. So we have a set release schedule, probably once in 2 months or once in 3 or 4 months to production, and then there would be some UAT activities as well in between. So I have to look at the release schedule, and I have to align my QA strategies and my test levels accordingly. How frequently I will test for release, and what would be that release be? Would that be a prod or non-prod? So that's how I will have an input to my test strategy. So these are the process inputs or methodology inputs towards a QA strategy. I'll move to the next slide. Taking a step back, a larger picture, wherein I would look at the product or service itself, as in what is the domain, what is the criticality of the product, where that product is exposed to. I mean, is it exposed to, for an example, a health industry like pacemaker, or critical mission, critical activities, and it would give me an input of how critical my testing would need to be. Definitely considering today's digitalization, what channels the product is exposed to. Just for an example, if I take an example of healthcare, I would have a lot of e-healthcare available globally, definitely, wherein patient information, patient monitoring, even patient consultation has become digital, and it is quite soon arriving into India. So my QA strategy also has to look at different channels wherein, just for an example, mobile, through which this happens. So testing of mobile apps and, mobile via web is very important in these days. Code and performance definitely important. Uh, is my release MVP, minimum viable product, or a full QA? That is also an important phase. I would say input towards creating a strategy. Definitely for a sprint or a set of sprints when I'm doing. So that would also, so if my product is going through a MVP development, I wouldn't probably, have all my QA efforts because an effort is also relating to the cost. So I would look at, aligning my QA efforts accordingly. You know, the next input is about the number of users that the product will be have, the peak users. What would be the locations from which the users will access this? Because also considering the global and legal scenarios, the data and where my application is hosted also becomes very important. Just for an example, my strategy also has to look at and confirm, wherein if a user is in the US, the cloud in which my application is hosted, is has a nearby center in the US. So these kind of requirements we have to, as a quality assurance professional, look at, and we have to check, what are the sites wherein the application is hosted. So we have to look at that as well. The roles and accesses metrics, the configs that we test is also a good input to a QA strategy. It has an element. The localization, internationalization testing, the SOAP and endurance tests that the app has to go through, the field trials, the network tests. We have seen that we have from 2G till there are some places definitely wherein the 5G, US, UK, for example, 5G has also been introduced. So we have to look at field trials as well of, the operational tests of my application, and definitely that is an input and a very important part of a test strategy. Talking about digital channels, I have to look after the point of sales, the CRM and e-commerce channels, and the hardware software integration, the backend integration of these as a part of my test strategy. It's so that is something which becomes a part of my QA strategy. Usability testing is also one more important point, wherein besides how the application functions, how it will be used by a user as an end user, uh, we have to look at that. The recovery, error handling, scaling up of the application, the resources consumed are also few parameters which we have to look at in a QA strategy. Accessibility testing has to be governed under specific laws, and then we have to look at whether our product, uh, complies, and definitely it has to comply. Just for an example, if I'm operating under a guideline of UK legal, or even a US legal, which has users who are accessibility challenged, my application or my product definitely has to give them some assurance with respect to, they should be able to here the tab flows, and they should be able to operate on that application. So that criteria often not uh, given that importance when we start the development, and then becomes very challenging to cope up with the developed application. So that is something which is a very important point. Security, definitely we have discussed this, but how secure my data is from a governance perspective, from an external threat modeling perspective, from a top 10 threats, OWASP perspective, all these have to be strategized, and efforts have to be aligned accordingly. When would I do my security testing or my performance testing? On what environment, and what would be my data, as well as what would be my environment configs vis-a-vis the production when I do a load and performance testing. Or when I, just for an example, when I do a security testing, would that be intrusive, non-intrusive, and how would I you know I would say do my threat modeling, and then how would I do my scans and then exploit the vulnerabilities, and then work with the development team in case of load and performance testing for tuning, and in case of security uh, security testing for the vulnerabilities eradication. So how I have to work closely with the development team. So uh, how would I do that? That becomes a part of my strategy. The next point is about the data and environmental needs. With the shift to cloud, uh, and a mix of clouds as well, a mix of technologies, it becomes very uh, important that I need to understand where my applications are hosted, and how are they provisioned, and what would I need to do to set up my accounts, to set up my data, and how would I access them, including the mobile apps. How would my APK be built, and how would it be shared, and what kind of devices I would use to test my app. So whether the devices would be on premise, or would the devices be over the cloud, what kind of level of automation I would do over the environmental, just for an example, even for a uh, then the next point is about the migration activities. So considering that I have a go live for my product, and the product is into production, the live production already, how would I have the users and data be migrated into a new app? So that becomes my test and input to a test strategy as well. So very important point. And a couple of few points is how would I measure it? What kind of measures do I have over the number of issues that I get post production, while deployment in UAT? How would I improve? That would become, I would say plan, do, check, and act. So that becomes my check always in a test strategy. How would I measure, at what efficiency I'm operating with respect to the costs that are being spent on QA activities. So that is one point. And the last point is how would I operate in terms of monitoring? So when I speak about dev and ops, from an ops perspective, in terms of resources, what at what performance level I am working at what are the resources that I am consuming, what is the scaling up that is happening in terms of resources, and how would I troubleshoot. So there are tools, just for an example, Dynatrace, which are used under operations, and it would continuously give us inputs. There are other tools as well, which gives us a feedback as well, in terms of how we have to work while doing my tests, which I do before release. So these are all the factors on a larger picture, also considering the business product and the scenario, the overall landscape. I have to look at building into a test strategy. So that's about the factors influencing the test strategy. Right. What could make it bulletproof for a developer? So considering all these points, as a developer, I would always like an early feedback. As a developer, I would always like automated tests being predicted, and I understand, as a QA, it has always happened that uh, I log out bug, and we have been questioned, is it necessary to log a bug? I mean, yes, we say for records it is very important. However, can you test in, can you test in my system? Because a developer wants a very early feedback so that he can go back and correct it before delivery or before a formal deployment into test. Because as soon as it gets deployed, you are also impacting a delay, because you are also there is also a time wherein the DevOps team has to contribute in getting the build and getting it deployed towards the test. So I need an early feedback. Okay, I need maximum coverage. Just for an example, my code coverage, the code secure tests. I need a prediction of what my QA, and then we have covered some of these points in the next slide as well. I need a prediction of which of the part of the software is flaky, which are the parts of the software which are likely to get issues depending on the criticality and depending on the multiple parameters. And then there are tools which detect that. I would like as much as testing to happen so that I get an automated feedback as well, the maximum coverage of my code. So there are tools, definitely we have covered them, which does a code coverage, which does a code secure coverage as well. There are a lot of tools provided by Chrome Dev as well. The Chrome development as a Google development, so we can use them as well. Some of them are for the page performance. It helps us to find the memory leak. It helps us to find the memory bloat, the garbage collections, and it helps us to get the endpoints which we can trace my API call and then use another tool to give a query, so that just to make sure what kind of error I'm hitting that API. So I would understand a developer need a little more than just a screenshot of a bug or just a video of the bug. He would need a log information. He would need the error trace. He would need an early feedback, so that he can correct it, and uh, he can update that as early as possible. So that's these are the inputs from a developer perspective. Uh, the next slide talks about some of the tools I have also shortlisted, and these are the tools. If you see Nessus, Fortify from a security perspective, we have Selenium, Appium, Catalan Studio from a mobile and automation perspective. So these are the tools being used, in JMeter from a performance perspective. So Perfecto from a mobile perspective. So these are some of the tools that have been just some of the tools. It's not that this is a complete list, and there is a reference. So these are some of the tools that would become part of my QA strategy, and I would say I would use this tool for this purpose. So this is about the tools. These are some of the techniques that I would use for my functional testing. So whichever process I would use, either be it a TMAP or ISTQB. This slide has a reference to Eurostar presentation, and so depending on what kind of complexity my application goes through or what is the business use, I would select some of the testing techniques, and they become part of my QA strategy. So I would say that functional testing, I would use the equivalence partitioning, boundary values. I would say probably a data cycle test, and so on. So this is how I would structure my testing techniques for my functional testing. So this is about the testing techniques. Now we go to the trends that we see for 2021, and how would it impact the test strategy. Definitely an AI ML. People are talking about automated scripts which are self-healing in nature. So just for an example, my element locators are changing. Okay, the script would identify it. The script would probably fail first. It would identify what has changed, and it would have an healer script to update it on its own. It would heal it, and it would take a next run. Uh, how how I would say efficient this process is, because this is maturing as of now. But definitely, AI-driven test automation or AI-influenced test automation is a way to come, and we have to look at all the possibilities wherein we can make the test automation process more efficient, considering that there are a lot of effort and cost involved in building the automation heavy or high automation suits. So it also has to pay back and become more efficient. Just one example, wherein there are efforts, there are regression models which are, there are definitely there are more references to it, and there is a work being and research work being happening in building those regression models so that the script become intelligent to identify the risk areas of a complex code. So I understand that you wouldn't always have a single code repository, because you would have a different UI front end, then you would have a back end, you would have a business logic built somewhere, and then you would have a database. So it will go through all those connections, and it would go to all those different points, and you would have multiple uh, code repositories, and the integration between them would always be a challenge. From that perspective, there are tools which understand which read your commit messages, which read your history, and depending on the regression logic that they have, or the regression learning that they do based on the AI/ML principles, they would identify the risk prone area, and the tool would have a capability to run only the impact or only the risk zone of the scripts. If I have, say, 500 or 1000 scripts, and if I have a daily deployment, it would be very difficult for me to run all those 500 scripts, and find the results. It would also consume a lot of resources as well. So we have to look at other efficient ways, including self-healing, and we also have to look at other efficient ways of identifying which are the risk prone areas. So that's where there is a lot of work which is happening around self-healing and around identifying a subset of the automated scripts which need to run. And there is one tool which is App Surify, and definitely there are more which are doing a lot of work in this area. So that's about AI and ML. A lot of service providers have come with self-healing automation frameworks, and they package it as a part of their services. Efficiency is definitely something which is to be looked at, because it's just an offering which has come right now. It has to be used. Another point is about the distributed cloud and Dockerization. couple of years back or more than that, we would have physical environments, we would have capital expenditures to procure servers, procure infrastructure, and then build it in house. Most of that part has become obsolete now. We are looking at private clouds, we are looking at hybrid clouds based on the uh, uh, criticality of business. We are looking at changing the test environmental expenses to OPEX now. And we are also looking at, building Docker images. So provisioning has become a lot easier. However, when I consider my QA strategy, I also have to look at, how testing of this image as a whole, then, building the data around it, and how would I test it, you know, how would my latency be over a cloud as a performance, does it scale up, and so many other parameters, which has a thread, when we looked at performance or as an input uh, to the test strategy. So I have to look at distributed clouds, interconnected clouds, and Dockerizations, wherein my applications would be hosted, and look at testing them. So this is also one of the trend which would be more eminent. It is already there in 2021. These are the inputs that we are seeing from Gartner Technology Trends and World Quality Reports. DevOps, as everybody knows, we have to look at more and more integrated way of executing the scripts, and having my QA tools part of the DevOps tool chain. So I would have Selenium with my NUnit framework, being integrated with Jenkins, and my scripts would run on deployment that is part of my DevOps toolchain. I would have JMeter scripts as well integrated, so that I would get a very early feedback of performance. And definitely there is a next slide as well, which talks about some of the tools that we use as a part of our test. So we have to look at these inputs or trends which are more and more prominent, and we have to consider them while devising our test strategy or QA strategy. Uh, the next one would be Internet of Things. And if I would consider just one scenario, a couple of days back, Google and Gmail had failed. And I read a very interesting tweet which became viral, wherein it said that a person with his kid, you know, was helpless because there was a power outage at his home, because the power was managed, using Google Home automation, and he was not able to do. He felt very helpless, and what to do. So uh, it is an impact of complicated networks of interconnected system, being more and more exposed in today's technological landscape. So we can look at connected cars, connected vehicles. We can look at integrating apps from your car to your home automation, and you have look at very many of the positive and happy path scenarios. But in real world, they could be very complex, and you have to look at the failure points as well while devising QA strategy. Just for an example, when we talk about the network tests, you have to look at 2G to 5G, over a Wi-Fi, offline tests, and so many other tests. So all these points would make creating QA strategy more and more difficult, challenging. It would be a fun as well, and we have to look at those scenarios and what would be the failure points, so that uh, uh, at an optimum efforts, I would not say minimum or maximum, so that there would be all the risks covered for the product. So these are the top four trends that there will be definitely more, but these are the trends that we see from Gartner and World Quality Report which has come up. which would impact strategy, for quality assurance as a whole. The last one, definitely some of the tools which we have used, we are using. Uh, the Chrome Dev tools, definitely, if you haven't heard, it has a feature for device mode, for device emulation, browser emulation, and Firefox also has a responsive design view. So we should use the Chrome Dev tools for even the memory, the responses, the memory leakage, the response time. So it has a lot of capabilities, and there are a lot of resources as well. So we should be, in order to help the development, we have to look at more and more ways of, as a QA or as an SDET, software in development engineering test. We have to look at using these features more and more often, so that we can help the developers. Because a test design has to help the developer to fix an issue very early. That's an essence of a test shift left. Accessibility, JAWS and Zoom text. When we talk about automation, Selenium, Appium, and other tools and frameworks accordingly, which we have seen either a BDD or a TDD driven frameworks. When we talk about the middleware API, Postman, SOAP, UI tools, which so all these tools would become a part of my tool strategy or a tools landscape, and then this tools landscape will become part of the DevOps landscape. So that's how the dots will connect and the picture will become complete. Code coverage, definitely the Sonar, Cube, Cobertura, and then few other tools, performance, JMeter, HP Performance Center, Neoload, Dynatrace for, the monitoring part of it. The network monitoring reporting, you have OpenNMS, Kibana, and many other tools around it. And the last one, probably around security, wherein, yeah, we have many other tools, such as AppScan and, SQL map and so on. So that's about the tools and techniques in the QA strategy. So these are some of the reference and credits from where, we have taken inputs, and we are open for questions now. And thanks for the patience and listening. Thank you.
Thank you, Sachin. We have some questions in the chat.
Okay.
The first one is from Amar. He wants to know, when do we choose TDD and BDD?
Okay. Uh, yeah, it's not just a minute. Hello. Yeah,
Yeah,
am I
go ahead,
audible?
Sachin. Yeah,
Yeah,
perfect.
it's not who choose TDD or BDD as such. Okay, because it's the overall. If I go to the, you know so these are the development process and methodologies as a whole, as a Scrum team, which decides, what kind of development framework, what kind of methodology under which I will develop my product and my tests. So if I'm doing a test-driven development, I would write a unit class first, and then I would start development. So these are very mature practices, I would say. And as a QA team, we have to understand the development process. Definitely, if you are part of a Scrum team, or if you are part of a product development team from inception, you would have a lot of say, understanding that in what ways the requirements are written. Okay, so if I have my requirements written in a BDD way, and my BAs, or I mean business analyst and product owners understand that, I would just intake that and I would convert them into scripts. So then I would have my automation framework developed under BDD context using Cucumber and Gherkins. So that's how I would say, we would use a framework, or we would design our framework.
Thank you, Sachin. One more question from Amar. He wants to know what are the challenges of testing in a hyper agile DevOps environment.
Right. I understand a hyper agile DevOps environment would ship continuously, right, into production. That's what I understand. Can I see the chat box? Uh,
You can click on the chat, which is chat icon, which is up
this one? No.
next to
Yes.
the people icon. Next.
Yeah, I'm sorry, Sachin. If you could just stop sharing your screen, I believe then you will be able to, because it.
Mhm.
Yes,
Okay.
I think now maybe.
Right. Right. And I have to look at the chat. Okay. Right. Okay.
The one from Amar
Yeah,
at
right, right,
409.
right, right. So, a hyper agile DevOps environment, I understand, would ship quite frequently. As we also discussed one example like a Facebook or a Google who would deploy quite frequently in an interval of hours, I would say 8 to 10 hours or 15 hours into production continuously. I would have my tests, see, the thing is, my dev and QA activities need to be very, very, I would say, professional in that case. Understanding from where we are coming back, from where we are coming from a waterfall model, and that way of working. I would have a manual QA. I would have a 2 weeks of sprint, and it, I would I don't have that much of automated processes currently, to support the hyper agile DevOps environment. And if I do, I would have definitely have a different test suits defined and automated already, and I would have my toolchain defined. And currently, the environments that we under which we work upon, uh, so it's a complete ecosystem that we talk about. The provisioning part of it, the scripting part of it, the defining. So maturity of everything, which I think we probably have to achieve. We don't have that, and very less companies are working at that efficient level. So the challenges would definitely be, I would say that, uh, I mean, from my experience, we had a lot of config issues, a lot of issues repeatedly coming in, wherein the configs were not correct, and our automated tests were failing, which is on a maturity level at a quite basic stage, for a product company. So that's where that was one example. uh, and then it is not just QA, it is also maturity of the entire product team. I mean, so one of the example I had seen that the BAs have been testing and there was no QA for a team of say 15 to 20 people. And it becomes very difficult in those scenarios. How much would a BA would test, when everything would be deployed into QA? So we have to set up our processes quite strong, uh, uh, a lot, I would say, completely automated if we have to deliver under hyper agile DevOps environment.
And probably it will also mean that how much the company is going to invest in the testing and
Definitely,
how frequently they want to really test, just
definitely,
move to the
definitely,
production. I mean, that will
definitely,
also be taken into considering whether you actually need a hyper agile delivery or not,
definitely.
because
And
cost of that would
yeah,
increase and manyfold, and they will have to see the return on investment also.
right. We also have to look at what kind of complexity of the features that we are releasing into production. So that also is a input that we have to look at.
Thank you. The next question is from Mr. RC Goel.
Mhm.
During progressive development in an agile environment, how individual part delivery and integrated delivery, keeping all the aspects of test strategy, are chosen and executed as pre-UAT before sending to the user for deployment.
Right. So, so we understand that in this progressive development, we get the features developed within my sprints. So I would have my stories and features being developed within the sprint. So I would test them in my sprint, and then the features and multiple modules, I would say branches, would combine for a release. So I would have my regression base. Definitely, most of it automated would run after the integration. From if I have a complex product which has multiple modules being developed by multiple teams, and that becomes a part of. So once I have this cycle run, I would ship it for the UAT, and then within UAT I would have again, as a traditional way, I would support the UAT, because either it will be done by my BAs or it would be done by the end customer itself. So one input to that is during my regression cycle, when I integrate my code, I integrate multiple features, multiple modules. I would also take an input from the UAT scripts, and I would have them run automated. So that becomes my strategy in this case. I hope I have answered the question.
Adding to that, Govind sir asks how the testing schedule for the above is configured.
Right. So we generally work backwards. Just for an example, from a go live to the development, we look at what time do we have in hand. Uh, for just for an example, if I have 4 teams working in parallel, and I have a 2 weeks of sprint, say in 2 months, I would have 4 sprints delivering to a release, and then they move to the next progression, wherein a team takes into regression and does a bit of regression testing before we deliver the ship the code, to UAT. So these kind of things we have to plan. So the now we have to understand how frequently I will deliver to prod, and then I have to work backward to plan my development, and that's part of the backlog planning. When I do my backlog planning, I have to look at after how many sprints I would integrate into regression. So when would I need my build or deployment for regression, and that's where I have a cutoff. I would definitely have multiple builds depending on number of scripts, but then I have some cutoff wherein after 4 sprints I take the first cut and then I start regression testing. So that calendar, so I would have a prod calendar already defined for an year or so. What would I ship to an year? Then it becomes part of my backlog planning, and then I work backwards to have my regression calendar on non-prod according.
Thank you. Amar wants to know, please share your thoughts. How can a developer have in-depth understanding of testing as per Agile? Same person has to do development testing, deployment, and support.
Okay. See, nowadays, I mean, we have a developer would, I would say, see what happens is, if the product development and developer, uh, they would gain an experience and insight as they work on the product, definitely. But between developer and the QA, both needs to have more insight of each other's work. Uh, for an example, a developer is developing front end of the product, and he interacts with the back end, how that for integration of his front end code. Now he also has to understand how this feature would a feature is part of a story, and then the story is part of an epic, and then at times the epic is part of a bigger end-to-end flow as well. So he has to under the developer, if he understands how the code, my feature gets integrated in an end-to-end flow, he would be able to appreciate and take those inputs into while testing his features. So that is what I mean. The developer has to understand the bigger picture, and the QA on a vice versa has to understand a smaller picture, in order to help each other.
Yeah, and I would say that this is the most people have confused this statement where the developer has in-depth understanding of the testing. The Scrum Guide would say that the team as a whole should be able to
Right,
deliver. It's not
right,
necessary that the developer has to have an in-depth knowledge of testing and the tester has to have an in-depth knowledge of, but they together as a team, they should be
right,
able to deliver the product. So the
right, right,
developer could do his basic testing as such and pass
correct,
it to the tester to have the in-depth testing done.
correct,
So it's not necessary that the developer would be doing the in-depth testing.
correct,
So that is the key thing which a lot of people mistake here.
correct,
And the second thing I would say is if they do a paired development, the developer and tester do a paired kind of programming and do the development itself. So they would be in a better position to understand the code and the testing together. So here paired programming
understand,
would help both the developer and the tester.
understood. Yeah.
Yeah. And there's one more question from Rohit. What is the significance of tester as a team member as per Scrum Guide 2020 version?
Right. See, the Scrum Guide always talks about Scrum team. It doesn't talk about specific roles, right? So we have to look at, see, as we have been developing traditionally, we have people coming to us as a tradition with traditional skill sets. Some of them are able to upskill to a development role. Some of them are not able to upskill. So we have to, whatever we have adapted to a, I would say, from my experience, a tailored version of how we work in an agile scrum kind of a situation. So a tester definitely again is a important part of scrum team. A developer is also an important part of scrum team from a scrum guide perspective. However, you know uh, in a toto, scrum guide doesn't differentiate between them. Some scrum guide always says that, even 2020 says that they are a significant part of a scrum team. So everybody, in whatever capacity they can, should be able to contribute. That's my take.
Yeah, that's right. Because everywhere is the Scrum team, and these roles which are there, the
Correct.
DBA, the tester, developer, are gone away with.
Correct.
And as a
Correct.
team, if you can develop and if you have that coordination
Correct.
within you, that is most
Correct.
important. To develop a
We
code,
have
we need a coordination between the team.
right, we have seen people shaping up and uh, taking up the role of developer or even a front end developer, if not completely developing the applications. So people step up from a QA role and take up that role. And they become flexi skilled, multi skilled kind of a thing. So, a developer tester or a tester developer, as per the need of the team, is something which we are seeing as a flexibility.
Yeah, thank you. There is one more from Amar. Kindly share your inputs if manual testing shall exist in the future, with hyper testing automation gaining momentum with COVID.
Right? I do still think that, even in 2021, manual testing or a functional testing would still prevail, uh, because of the complexities that we work under, the challenges, even as we are doing hyper test automation. Uh, uh, so we have to look at, a completely building completely new teams if we have to look at hyper test automation. So if I am setting up a hyper test automation and I have to do uh, in sprint automation kind of a work, I will not have QA or a manual QA under I would have a developer doing or creating scripts and testing it as they are becoming available. So that is possible. However, there would still be understanding that after each sprint, we will definitely not ship the product to production. There would still be a some time in between. You will have a release testing. So, and the release testing cannot be 100% automation. So there would have to be some amount of config, some amount of data activities, setup activities which will happen. And I still see that even in hyper automation, unless the end-to-end automation is being achieved, we will have functional or manual testing. That's what I understand. I think.
Thank you so much. And I believe due to the time constraint that we have to make a hard stop here. Thank you so much for your energy and efforts that you've put into this speaker session. And thank you so much,
Shreya.
Ajay.
Thank you, Ajay. Thank you, RC sir. Has been quite learning experience for me as well.
Great for us
And
as well.
thanks to all the participants as well.